Hi everyone, it's GigaBeef here, and today I'm going to show you my favourite default M4 loadouts through a particularly efficient min-maxed mid-tier M4 build that I run all the time, and the associated kits that go with them. To be honest, this is the way that I start building all my M4s these days, which is by using an ADAR to begin, because it actually doesn't matter exactly what this durability is, because this durability is pinned to the base component or the lower receiver of the ADAR, so we can really buy any of these, and what we're really looking for is some cheap stuff. You get a few parts with this. Now we're going to strip down most of this and only use a few pieces, but if we take off the sight and we take off a little bit of M855 and we get a magazine here for free as well, and the ADAR wood, this is kind of the ADAR that you want to start with. So you've got the upper, you've got the barrel, you've got the ADAR charging handle, and you've got the buffer tube. Everything else we're actually going to replace here. So what we can do is go and sell all of this stuff back to mechanic, because we don't actually need any of these parts. We actually don't need the ADAR lower either. So this is 6,900, which we get back. We're going to go to mechanic 2 and look for weapons and look for the tiny little piece here, which is the 20,600 ruble M4A1 lower receiver. Now that we've bought this, what we're going to do is we're going to move all of the parts from the ADAR over onto the M4. So that just means we take all of these pieces off, and then we're left with this ADAR lower, which we can just sell back to mechanic. Actually, this one is broken, so we're going to have to sell it back to fence for 1,000 rubles. So you don't really get much back for this. This is going to effectively start off our M4. This is now an M4 because we have a lower from an M4 and we have a barrel. These barrels are normally a bit more expensive, as I said, which is the reason why you want to be buying the ADAR, because you get a few other pieces for free. Now, if we look into the edit preset, we're going to build the regular M4 that I tend to run. What we're going to do here is prioritize cheap components that are good value. So the Mark 12 low profile gas block, or the pistol grip, we're going to go with one of the OMRGs because it's a good middle ground of ergonomics. We're going to go for the green style here because it's the one that I usually prefer. In terms of stocks, the MOE is really one of the best stocks in the game for the M4 and this kind of series, and it's pretty much unbeaten in terms of ergo and recoil balance. And then we put the rubber back pad on it, which seals the deal and makes it really, really good. For handguards, we're going to use the Alexander Arms, the Mark 10, and underneath this, we have the Alexander Arms 10-inch rail. This used to be at Mechanic 4, but is now at Mechanic 3, which is beautiful. It means that we can now use this rail even if we're slightly lower trader levels, which is perfect. In terms of foregrips, we're going to use the RVG Black. I'll stick this on here. And then for the compensator, this is an interesting one because I've been using the poor man's jailbreak. So this is unsuppressed, but by virtue of it being unsuppressed, it means you get a lot more ergonomics. So this is the Furfran's CQB combined with the Furfran's CRD concussion reduction device on there. And this pretty much makes the base weapon with 67 ergonomics and 56 recoil. The two little tweaks I'm going to make from here, because this is a relatively short range build for me, this isn't going to be some DMR or something, is that usually I stick on the delta point. We're going to use the delta point mount and the delta point sight itself. Just leave that there. If you want any lasers, you can on the front, but I'm not going to on this build. And then in terms of magazines, you'll see why this is important a little bit later, but we're going to use one of the 40 rounders, and that basically completes the build here. In terms of pricing, if we go to find parts, we can go and actually see, get rid of the traders here. We can tick and untick the things that we actually had to buy versus the things that we didn't. So we had the ADAR up already, Colt and ADAR, and the barrel, we didn't need to buy it because we got those from the ADAR itself. The M4 we didn't need to get either. And so all of these other pieces we needed to buy. So it's basically like 97k's worth of mods, plus the M4 lower, which was the 20k, and then minus the 6,000 or 7,000 of ADAR pieces. So you end up getting to around 133k for this particular build. The biggest sticking point for people normally is this one, which is Peacekeeper 4, which is slightly annoying because it means that you can't build this straight away. And Peacekeeper 3, you can buy all the other pieces except for this. The one thing that I would say is that this isn't really a piece that's in demand all that often. And normally you can buy it for just a little bit more, if not exactly the same as the trader price on the flea market. And so I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you really can't find any, if there are just none at the time on the marketplace, then you're really going to have to switch to something suppressed, because none of the other straight up compensators are any good and are better than this really, unless you're going for the jailbreak, but that's completely outside of the scope of this. So you're going to have to switch over to something suppressed, and what I would do is I would use the Knight's Armament combination, which is the QDC, and then one of the suppressors. I just buy one of them from the flea market, and this is only 6 grand more because the suppressors are normally about 25,000 or something, and the actual compensator is only about 5k. So it's about 30k rather than 22k for this combination. And this, as you can see from here, gets you to 42 ergo and 54 recoil. So the recoil is very, very slightly better, but the ergonomics takes a little bit of a hit. So if you have Peacekeeper level 4, you can run the unsuppressed one with CRD no problem, buy everything from him. If you only have Peacekeeper level 3, then you can either go for this build or buy one off the flea market if they're available. If you only have Peacekeeper level 2 and you don't have Peacekeeper level 3, then I would say just run the MDR, and I have a video about the MDR which you can watch, and I wouldn't start modding M4s until you can get Peacekeeper level 3, because you really just don't want to be buying parts from the flea market, if at all possible, because usually it's very, very expensive, and this also counts for rounds too, so you'll end up spending a lot less money and get something very similar. If you're the other way around and you have a lot of your traders maxed, you can actually use the advanced tube from mechanic level 4, which is a lot better than the regular Colt one that you get, and this gives you 4% recoil reduction rather than the 1% from the straight up Colt. And this is actually the best bang for your buck really in terms of some of the attachments, because it's only 11,700 and this gets you down to 50 instead. The other one that's kind of good is the Ultor Upper, which reduces recoil by 4% on its own. Irritatingly, we have to put the rest of the gun back together, so I'm going to do that now. And when we do this and we put on the CRD and CQB, we get to 66 and 46. And if we switch back across to the Knight's Armament Suppressor version, we get to 48 and 44. So it really depends on whether you want to spend another 40,000 between the two of these for getting 44 recoil rather than 50s. So now that we've decided on our weapon, I actually have one we've made earlier that I'm going to move straight over onto our PMC. And this is the one that we were looking at, which is the unsuppressed version. The issue now is that if we want to use these 40 rounders, we're really restricted in terms of the rigs that we can actually use. And my favorite at the moment is the Alpha rig, which is fantastic because it has 4 of these 3x1 slots, which allows you to then seamlessly change around and unload and reload back in and out with no problems whatsoever. The good thing about this is that they're only 50k from Ragman 3, but they can be gotten from a barter with him at level 2 as well, with 5 duct tapes, i.e. the white one, and an alkali, which can be as low as 35,000 as a combination if you get the tape in cheap off the fleet. But for the purposes of our calculation, we're going to assume that you get it in for about 40,000. Now, you're going to want probably 2 more mags at least, and this is going to be 15k because they're 7,500 rubles each. And then in terms of meds, like the usual way that I min-max this stuff is I have a car kit. Some people disagree with me and want to go for something a bit bigger like a Solero or an IFAK, but the car kit I usually find is good enough and is nice and cheap. And then I have a bandage and hemostat combination, which I tie these together with one button so that when I press, the hemostat comes up first, and then when I let go, the bandage then activates second. And this means that it prioritizes bleeds. So I use these two in that combination. If you don't want to or can't buy a hemostat, the one that I would recommend is from Peacekeeper, which is the med that he sells, one of the very few, which is the cat hemostat. And if you look at this, it's got a use time of 3 seconds, which is why it's actually better than the S-Marge from Therapist, because this has a use time of 5 seconds. Now you might be wondering, well, what's the use time of the hemostat? Well, yes, this is also 3 seconds. So the cat kind of does the job and is a little bit better than the S-Marge. In terms of stims, pretty much these days, I almost always bring a Propitol. These are good because they give you the pain removal, which is what you're after. And then they also give you a very small tick up of health regeneration, which is +1, which means that if you get your limb blacked out by a shotgun or something, and some of the damage gets redistributed across the rest of your PMC, rather than having to heal every single individual limb separately, you can just use a Propitol and it'll tick up the 2 or 3 damage across each limb and heal you without you having to sit in the corner and constantly heal all the different parts, because that is really quite frustrating. That's probably the best part about the Propitol. We always want to use a head cover. I tend to go for these Shamars, the tan version, but you can go for whichever. You can go for the green one if you want, and if you don't want to buy those, then you can go and buy balaclavas from Ragman, which you can get right at level 1. Doesn't really matter, just something so that when you're wearing it, kind of covers your face a bit so that you break up your silhouette and you're not quite as obvious. So adding all these parts up so far gets us to 205k or 225k with Propitol. One of the problems with loadouts in Escape from Tarkov is they quickly rack up. It's not just the gun, but it's the price of your armor and your rigs and all of the meds and the ammo that you have to take with you, which we'll go into in a second, and it ends up adding up quite quickly. Ammo is obviously very, very important, and M855A1 is a really critical landmark for people to hit if you're trying to run M4s. And when we go and have a look, you can see it's sold by 2 traders. Now this one from Skier, the level 4 Skier purchase is crazy. 368 rubles is very, very, very good for M855A1, given the tier of rounds that it's at. And pretty much every time that this is on sale, I just buy it. You only get 90 rounds, but if you just continuously look out for it and do it every time you're at your PC, you'll end up with a decent stockpile, which means you can run it all the time. Then you can also buy 120 from Peacekeeper. Now clearly this is a lot more expensive. If you try to buy 100, it's not the 7 that it says here, it's actually $6.41, which is roughly 800 rubles per round. But this comes out at over double the price from Skier. So if we go back to our builds here, the rounds and magazines that we've got means that we're going to be taking 120 with us sort of at risk on our actual person. So not including our secure container, because we'll keep this if we die. So from Skier at 368 rubles each, that's actually only going to cost us 44k, which is really good for the ammo that it is. From Peacekeeper, on the other hand, given that it's 800 rubles a round, that's going to cost 96,000 to keep that on our person. So if we run in and we die immediately, we lose 96k's worth of ammo without really doing anything. If you don't have Skier 4, you might think that you want to stack some other rounds at the bottom and kind of load it half and half. You can go to Peacekeeper and get M856A1, and if we try to buy 100 of these, you can see it costs $3.01. This is about 376 rubles, and that means that as an average, you're going to be looking at 588 rubles per round if you stack your magazines half and half with 20 of these and 20 of 55A1, which still means that you're going to be carrying 70k's worth of stuff on your kit, which is the reason why I really do think that you want to be running one of these loadouts once you reach Skier 4, because the price of M855A1 makes the whole thing a lot more efficient. And by the way, every time I do one of these videos, people talk about the price on the flea market. Don't buy it on the flea. It is absolutely insane. Please don't buy it on the flea. On to the final pieces of the puzzle. Armor and a few of the other ancillary parts. So if I was running a general kit which I wanted to min-max, then I've gone through previously about choosing the right pieces of armor, and I think that Redoute is one of the best in terms of good bang for buck, and you can get them for around 140,000 to 150,000. This one is basically new and it'll stand you in good stead. The other alternative is the Gen 4 high mobility. This one I don't like as much because of the turn rate on it is very, very low, and it means that you end up having to change your mouse all the time. But this is also an okay armor. They're looking like they're a bit more expensive at the moment, but these ones also usually in around 150k. So the Redoute M is usually my favorite. So we can go and stick that on. I've left it in my bag here. Now, in terms of headwear, there is a strong argument to just say don't wear anything at all and just keep your head looking like this, because a lot of the time the helmet is just not going to save you. I do think there is something to be said for the Ratnik. The Ratnik is level 3, it's not going to save you from nearly anything, but it does have a high ricochet chance and it does cover top, nape and ears. And the beauty of the Ratnik is that when you go and have a look at what barters are available for it, then you have the 2 bleach for the Ratnik. So rather than paying 33k, you just need to buy 2 of these bleaches, and that's going to cost you about 24,000. So that's very, very effective for what is actually an okay helmet given the high ricochet chance. Now, what makes this even better is that when you go to insure this thing, it only costs 8,000 rubles, and you'll get this helmet back over and over and over and over again. I think I even have a Ratnik down here that has got 13.3 maximum HP. It's pretty insane. You'll get this helmet back so many times. So you kind of make a 24k investment and you'll get it back a lot. One of the problems with helmets in general is they're just not that efficient when it comes to the protection that you get for the cost. So if we go and have a look at the ULAC, which is basically the Ratnik but the next level up, because this is level 4 on everything and you get top, nape and ears. So this is the same thing. This is now 80,000. So this is a lot more for not actually having any face protection, and it's a good helmet, but I just don't know for 85k whether this is necessarily that efficient. If you want a nice middle ground, there's the 2001 and the 2002, which are effectively the same helmet for all intents and purposes, pretty much. And these cost around 35 to 40,000. If we go and have a look at the 2, then you can get these at approximately this price. And the difference is that this doesn't have ears protection, so it's just top and nape, but it does still have a high ricochet chance and have an armor class of 4. So really the choice is between 24k for level 3 and ears, 40k for level 4 and no ears, or 80k for level 4 and ears. So I'm not really sure, honestly. It's kind of up to you, personal preference. I tend to run a lot of Ratniks, but sometimes I run the ULAC as well. It really just depends. The very final piece is the bag. I don't really take bags any smaller than the day pack, to be honest with you. The ability to stick an M4 like this, anything that's 5 slots long in the bag, is really, really useful. And anything smaller than this, like a 4x4, you're not going to be able to put these guns in there. So I think the day pack really is kind of the minimum that you should be going with. And there's a couple of different options. There's the day pack, there's the Berkut, there's the Scav backpack, but pretty much all of them are going to cost you around 18,000 rubles. I normally have a big stack of these in my stash, so I never normally have to buy them, but you can just get them off the flea market. And there are also some barters for these things. This one is the 1 DVD drive and 1 hard disk. And for the Berkut, you can use the Jetta Riot helmet as a barter from Ragman 1 to get one as well. But normally it costs you around 18,000, sort of no matter what you do. You can craft Scav backpacks in the Hideout, but they have a red banner on them, so I do prefer to use the day packs or the Berkut because they're all one colour and it's either black or green, which is a bit better than having a red banner on your back saying, please shoot me. I nearly forgot about headsets. The GSSHs are really efficient, they only cost 13,000. People hate the GSSHs, but if I'm going to be playing a lot inside and there's not a lot of ambient sounds, so somewhere like factory, I use the GSSHs all the time. Some people say that they hate them and they make their ears bleed, but just use whatever you want. If I'm playing outside, I tend to use the Razors because they seem to have much better ambient cancellation for me, and so I switch back between the GSSHs and the Razors depending on where I'm playing, but this really is up to you and just depends on your personal preference. Running down the cost of this total loadout, we have the weapon at 133k, the ammo from Skier for 44,000, we have the alpha rig for 40,000 using the barter, the armor at 150k from the flea, helmet 24k using the barter, the ears, which is the GSSHs, at 13,000 straight from Ragman, the other bits and bobs, the meds and some of the mags is 52,500, and the bag is about 18k, and this gets us to roughly 475,000 rubles for the loadout. And this might surprise you because it does sound like a lot, and it sounds like a lot to me too, but it's very easy to forget for some of these parts when you're adding in all the pieces like the helmet and the ears and everything, that this stuff really adds up quite quickly. One thing that I didn't mention is any grenades. I'd advise taking at least one if it's just for defense to stop someone from pushing you. I usually take 2 to 4 depending on what I'm doing, and F1s are the cheapest at 9,000 rubles, but they are quite heavy, and that comes down to personal preference as well as whether you'd rather take those or Vogs or something else, and the number exactly that you want to take. So that could add between 10 and 40k on top to make it pretty much 500,000 rubles for this kit. Now, if you have Ragman 4, you can actually make this kit slightly more efficient. Now, I don't have Ragman 4, which is why I didn't start off with this, and at level 42, he's now the highest trade level, which makes it quite annoying. But the Ars Armor CPC is one of my favourite rigs when you actually get to Ragman 4, and I ran this a lot in previous wives. And when you look at the barters, this barter is absolutely fantastic, and you basically need 3 Kajura, you need 1 whiskey, and you need 3 Ripstop. Kajura and Ripstop are normally around 25,000-ish on the flea market, and whiskey is about 40,000, and so that means that this is going to cost you 190k to do the barter, which is very good compared to where you can see the flea market is pricing it. However, it gets better because Kajura is really efficient to make in the hideout, and you can make it for 8,000 rubles in the lavatory, and I make this all the time, so that ends up being 24,000 plus 75,000 plus 40,000, so it's about 140k of real cash outlay, and this also has 2 3x1 slots, which allows us to run the 40 rounders that we were looking at before, and this will save us about 50k in total. If we step back down to using 2x1 slots, then we can either use a 60 rounder and 2 30 rounders, or just go for all 30s, and we have a high ergo build, so it is possible to take the 60s. And there's a Peacekeeper 3 barter for the cheapest 60 rounder, and that's still about 50 to 60k, so it's pretty expensive and takes our ergo down to 49 if you actually do go and use that. If we want to really cheap out, then we effectively just want to downgrade our kit down to class 4. So what we'll do instead is we'll take one of these 6B3 TMs, and buy one, and they're 50,000 from Ragman, but sometimes you can find new ones for slightly cheaper, but not today. This is 50k, we'll get one of these and we're going to stick that on. Then we're going to take some Stanag mags here, and we're going to get rid of our old one, which is the 40 rounder. Instead, we're going to have one in here, and we're going to have 2 outside, and we're going to take the same things in terms of car, hemostat, propitol, all of that stuff. We'll keep that for the time being. And if we really want to just kind of get to the minimum viable cost, then we're just going to get rid of the helmet as well, because does it actually make that much difference? Not most of the time. So what we've done is we've actually saved 24,000 on the helmet, 40k not using the alpha, 100k on the armor, and the basic Stanags are only 2,500 rubles each. So we've saved 15k on the mags, and then you're only taking 90 rounds worth in rather than 120. So that saves another 11k using the gear prices on M855A1. If we then decide to only use the painkillers within our rig and we take out the propitol, that saves another 20k. So this comes in at 210,000 rubles worth of savings and makes the kit 265,000 rubles in total instead. Now look, this is an option, and I run the 6B3TM all the time with cheap guns like the MP7, but I don't really like running class 4 at this point of the wipe with modded guns like the one we've made, especially on short range builds because you're going to be taking some fire, and most ammo shreds level 4 armor at this point in the wipe, so the overall loadout to me feels a little bit imbalanced, and I'd want to use a cheaper gun if I was going to be using class 4, which is the reason why I tend to use class 5. But as you can see, it makes a big difference overall, and in certain circumstances it doesn't make any difference, and sometimes you get shot in the head, so I can absolutely see why people think that running the cheaper kit is more efficient and better overall. It really depends on where you're going and what kinds of players you think you're going to be fighting. If you want to go the other way around and you want to get something that's in the class 6 category, I still think that the Tagilla rig, like this one here, is one of the best values overall. You can still have the same space pretty much for all the things that you need, And the beauty of this is that you can get them really quite cheaply. So I got this one the other day, bought a 0 out of 60 for 100,000, and to repair it, it's only going to cost 50k. So 150k gets you a level 6 rig, which I think is really, really good. And the trick to this is when you go filter by item, you have to get rid of the operational only. These things have gone up a little bit, but you can get a new one for 190k. If you get rid of operational only, then sometimes you get some real bargains in here because people don't always look. And yeah, it's going to cost you 50k, so these aren't worth it. But there was one sat there at 100,000 that somebody was offloading, and I picked that one up and effectively made this 50,000. To repair this, and it goes back to 55. So it's still very, very good. This is level 6, so that extra 5 that's missing really won't make a difference. It's still better than level 5 armor. Finally, I'm just going to show you kind of how this feels when using it in the hideout, when you're looking at it full auto. So we've got the 40 rounders in at the moment. I'm just going to pull the trigger and not do anything with my mouse to start with. So it pulls up a bit, but not actually too much. So it goes from here to kind of there, and then back down again. One of the issues that I've talked about previously about these compensator combos is about the gas venting. This really is a main problem here because we've got a light source right above us. So if you're not in the light source, you can see it's actually a lot better. You can still see your target. It's not actually too bad. And the thing about the 800 RPM of the M4 is that it's fairly easy to control. It's not like the MP7, which actually also has mid-50s recoil, but it feels much harder and much more spray because of the 950 RPM rather than the 800 of the M4. But it still gives you the good time to kill that you don't really get from the MDR or the AK platform, which is why the M4 gets used a lot, and in many cases it gives you the best of both worlds. If you enjoyed today's video and you want to support the channel, please consider dropping a like, sub or a comment. All are free to do and help out a lot. Also, don't forget to check out the channel's new dedicated music playlists on Spotify, the links for which are in the description. To see when I'm streaming, you can join the Discord and follow me on Twitter. I'm usually live twice a week on Twitch, and once on Friday at 9 PM UK time for the Scav Talk podcast with my fellow Tarkov at church, which is in the description too, and a regular Tarkov stream on Saturday at 2 PM UK time. And with all that said, I'll see you next time, and as always, have fun in your raids.